Which principle of radiation protection states that exposure should be kept as low as reasonably achievable? A. Time principle. B. ALARA principle. C. Shielding principle. D. Distance principle. The ALARA principle is the cornerstone of radiation protection. It emphasizes that even if radiation exposure is below the permissible limit, it should still be kept as low as reasonably achievable by optimizing work practices, protective barriers, and monitoring controls. Which of the following is the most effective way to reduce radiation exposure? A. Increasing exposure time. B. Standing closer to the source. C. Using shielding, maintaining distance, and minimizing time. D. Working without protective gear. Radiation exposure is controlled through the three fundamental protection principles: time, distance, and shielding. Minimizing the time of exposure, maximizing the distance from the source, and using appropriate shielding materials significantly reduce dose levels. This is the core of the ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable, concept.
Which statement best represents the concept of the dose makes the poison in hazardous materials management? Options: A. All hazardous wastes are acutely toxic regardless of amount. B. Only materials listed on a safety datasheet can cause harm. C. A material's hazard is determined only by its flammability or reactivity. D. Any substance can become harmful if exposure surpasses a certain limit.
Correct answer: D. Any substance can become harmful if exposure surpasses a certain limit. Explanation: the principle, the dose makes the poison, indicates that any substance, even water, can become hazardous at sufficiently high exposure levels. Safety data sheets, SDS, provide important information but do not alone define a material's potential toxicity. Likewise, properties like flammability or reactivity are not the sole determinants of a substance's harmful effects. Toxicity is always dependent on the dose and exposure conditions, not merely on the inherent nature of the material. What is the main reason personal sampling is considered the preferred method for evaluating worker exposure? Options: A. It collects air samples from a fixed point in the workplace. B. It measures air in the worker's breathing zone during normal activities. C. It uses direct reading instruments to provide instant concentration data. D. It requires fewer resources compared to grab sampling. Correct answer: B. It measures air in the worker's breathing zone during normal activities. Explanation: Personal sampling is preferred because it captures air samples directly from the worker's breathing zone while they perform their routine tasks, providing the most accurate representation of actual exposure. Stationary, area, sampling only reflects environmental conditions in a specific location, not what the worker inhales. Direct reading devices show real-time concentrations but may not record cumulative exposures accurately. Personal sampling often requires more resources and time than grab sampling but yields more reliable exposure data. After meeting all hazardous waste management requirements throughout the waste's life cycle, what must be done before exceeding the accumulation time or quantity limits? A. Ensure compliance with storage, containment, labeling, and accumulation requirements. B. Obtain a site-specific EPA identification number. C. Ship the waste to a licensed TSDF using the EPA DOT manifest system. D. Confirm proper waste categorization. Correct answer, C. Ship the waste to a licensed TSDF using the EPA or DOT manifest system. Explanation. Before surpassing the established quantity or time limits, hazardous waste must be shipped to a licensed treatment, storage, and disposal facility, TSDF, through a certified transporter using the EPA DOT manifest system. This ensures proper tracking of waste from its point of generation to final disposal. Prior steps include obtaining an EPA ID number, classifying the waste, and ensuring proper storage, labeling, and record-keeping per RCRA requirements. Maintaining cradle-to-grave documentation is critical for compliance verification. In construction remediation, what does the acronym TSI stand for? Options. A. Asbestos-containing material applied to pipes, tanks, and boilers. B. Temporary surface installation. C. Toxic chemical waste produced during remediation. D. Material contaminated with black mold. Under OSHA's Asbestos Standard, 29 CFR 1910, 1001, TSI, thermal system insulation, is defined as asbestos-containing material applied to pipes, tanks, and boilers to control temperature, and it is critically important because it is almost always highly friable, easily crumbled, when disturbed, leading to a high potential for airborne asbestos fiber release and inhalation risk. For this reason, TSI is categorized under the most hazardous operations, Class 1 asbestos work, requiring strict control methods like regulated work areas, negative air pressure, and wet removal techniques to ensure worker exposure remains below the permissible exposure limit, PEL, of 0.1 fibers per cubic centimeter, 0.1 F per cc, averaged over an 8-hour shift. How do hazardous substances that were previously spilled, buried, or absorbed into the ground migrate into indoor air of structures above them? Options. A. Point source pollution. B. Vapor intrusion. C. Nutrient pollution. D. Non-point source pollution. Correct answer. B. Vapor intrusion. Vapor intrusion happens when vapor-forming contaminants in soil or groundwater rise and infiltrate buildings, degrading indoor air quality. This is the same process by which naturally occurring radon gas seeps into homes. Point source pollution involves discharges from identifiable points, like pipes, while nutrient and non-point source pollution relate mainly to water contamination, not air migration. Which of the following is an example of indirect contact with a biological agent? Options. A. Blood splashing into a worker's eye from an infected patient. B. Picking up contaminated dressings and then touching your face. C. Being bitten by an infected animal. D. Inhaling airborne droplets from a coughing patient. B is correct because picking up contaminated dressings and then touching your face is indirect contact. Indirect contact happens when a person touches a contaminated object, fomite, and transfers pathogens to themselves. Which asbestos-related disease is most commonly associated with exposure to asbestos fibers? Options. A. Leukemia. B. Mesothelioma. C. Ulcerative colitis. D. Squamous cell carcinoma. The mesothelioma explanation is correct. It's the most definitive and severe cancer associated with asbestos exposure, caused by inhaling microscopic fibers that become lodged in the lining of the lungs or abdomen. These durable fibers cause chronic irritation and inflammation, leading to malignancy in the mesothelium. Because the disease has a remarkably long latency period, typically 20 to 50 years after initial exposure, a diagnosis often occurs decades after a person's last exposure to the mineral. While asbestos also significantly increases the risk of other cancers, such as lung cancer, mesothelioma is the signature disease that rarely develops without this specific mineral exposure. At which biosafety level must all work be performed in a biological safety cabinet? Options. Option A, BSL 1. Option B, BSL 2. Option C, BSL 3. Option D, BSL 4. The core requirement for the biosafety level is dictated by the risk of aerosol transmission BSL-3 demands that all open manipulations of infectious materials, e.g., Mycobacterium tuberculosis be conducted within a certified biological safety cabinet, BSC, to prevent inhalation and contain airborne pathogens. While BSL-2 only requires a BSc for aerosol generating procedures, the BSL-3 standard mandates this primary barrier for nearly all work with the serious or potentially lethal agents studied at this level. BSL-4 uses either a BSc or a positive pressure suit.
Which bacterial disease is transmitted through inhalation of spores and is particularly dangerous to workers handling wool, hides, or animal products? Options: A. Brucellosis, B. Anthrax, C. Tetanus, D. Leptospirosis. The correct answer is anthrax. Explanation: this disease, caused by the bacterium Bacillus anthracis, is a major occupational hazard. The bacterium forms highly resilient spores that can contaminate animal products like wool, hides, and hair. When these materials are handled, sorted, or processed, the spores can become airborne and inhaled deep into the lungs. This specific route of transmission leads to inhalation anthrax, historically called wool sorter's disease, which is the rarest but deadliest form of the infection. Under the hierarchy of controls for biological hazards, personal protective equipment, PPE, is considered A. the first line of defense, B. the most effective control method, C. the last line of defense, D. equally effective as engineering controls.
The correct answer is C. The last line of defense. PPE is placed at the bottom of the hierarchy of controls because it is the least effective control measure. It is a final barrier that protects the worker only, and it does not eliminate the hazard at the source. Unlike engineering controls, like biosafety cabinets, PPE is subject to human error, requires correct fit and constant vigilance, and should only be relied upon when higher-level controls, elimination, substitution, engineering, and administrative, are not feasible or fail to fully contain the risk. Responding to hazardous waste operations, such as spill response and cleanup, requires elements like planning and organization, employee training, medical surveillance programs, site characterization, air monitoring, site control, and decontamination. Which key component of hazardous waste operations is not listed here? A. Dock placarding. B. Groundwater contamination. C. Personal protective equipment. D. Emergency medical response. Correct answer, C. Personal protective equipment. Explanation: anyone entering a hazardous waste site must be safeguarded against potential hazards. Personal protective equipment, PPE, serves to isolate or shield workers from chemical, physical, and biological risks encountered on site. Comprehensive hazardous waste operations involve meticulous planning to anticipate hazards, ensure training aligned with job duties and risks, establish site-specific medical monitoring, and perform site characterization to identify hazards. Air monitoring is essential to detect airborne contaminants, while site control prevents public exposure and contamination. Finally, decontamination protects personnel and equipment by removing or neutralizing hazardous substances. Responding to hazardous waste operations, such as spill response and cleanup, requires elements like planning and organization, employee training, medical surveillance programs, site characterization, air monitoring, site control, and decontamination. Which key component of hazardous waste operations is not listed here? A. Dot placarding. B. Groundwater contamination. C. Personal protective equipment. D. Emergency medical response. Correct answer, C. Personal protective equipment. Explanation: anyone entering a hazardous waste site must be safeguarded against potential hazards. Personal protective equipment, PPE, serves to isolate or shield workers from chemical, physical, and biological risks encountered on site. Comprehensive hazardous waste operations involve meticulous planning to anticipate hazards, ensure training aligned with job duties and risks, establish site-specific medical monitoring, and perform site characterization to identify hazards. Air monitoring is essential to detect airborne contaminants, while site control prevents public exposure and contamination. Finally, decontamination protects personnel and equipment by removing or neutralizing hazardous substances.